Recording. Okay, so good evening, and thank you for joining us for another of Pillars of Peace's webinars. Tonight, we're talking about the psychological impact of stalking, and we will talk a little bit about what stalking is to begin with, but we're highlighting the psychological impact because this is a form of abuse that has particularly difficult lingering emotional and mental health impacts long after what may have been the last recorded stalking incident. And it's also something that a lot of people don't understand very well, or that gets misrepresented a lot in the media. So that's why we think it's really important to talk about and share more information. So first, we're talking about what stalking is. It is a pattern of behavior directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to fear for that person's safety or for the safety of others connected to them, or to suffer substantial emotional distress. And this may sound like a kind of squishy or malleable definition because stalking can encompass a variety of behaviors. And one of the big things that really is important to understand when it comes to stalking is that context is incredibly important. Something that may be that is threatening to one person may not be threatening to another. And that's not just because of issues like bias or a person, one person being more fearful than another. It's because most people are stalked by someone they already know. And so there can be things that are understood between those people in a way that gives meaning to that particular action. So it's something that we hear a lot from stalking survivors is that when they first tried to get help or protection or assistance from certain first responders or providers or even other people in their community, so that other people didn't understand why what was happening was a big deal to them or was so scary. And a lot of people kept wanting to give the stalker the benefit of the doubt. So we have this kind of broad definition that it's a pattern of behavior. And if you've been to our other webinars about gender-based violence and about intimate partner violence, you'll hear that phrase, a pattern of behavior, a lot. It's not about one incident, it's about a pattern, something that happens over and over. So what can stalking include? And here's where you'll see a lot of the things that how many different types of actions and tactics can all fall under the umbrella of stalking. So one of the things that most people think of when they think of stalking is surveillance. This can be everything from physically following the person to using contacts, like checking up with mutual friends or acquaintances or even coworkers in a way to find out where the victim is moving, where the victim is, what they've been doing, who they've been talking to. And it can also involve using technology, everything from the, putting malware or spyware on somebody's devices to the old fashioned, using a bug or camera or other type of device to keep tabs on the victim's movements. And the purpose of that for a stalker is not just to know where the victim is, it is to have a sort of control over that victim. So stalking is another form of abuse where power and control is really central to what's happening. The next term is something that you may not have heard before, but is often talked about when in stalking awareness conversations, and this is the term life invasion. And they've come up with this term to describe what happens to victims, which is not necessarily just that the person is following them, but that they're constantly intruding in their life without their consent. So maybe just showing up places unexpectedly, showing up at their place of work, showing up at their home, showing up when they're out with friends or they're doing something, independently of that person and either didn't ask them to be there or didn't even tell them where they were going to be. And something that's important to remember is that even when the individual messages or actions seem innocuous or positive, the overall aim is to show the stalker's reach and control. So this is another place where context matters, right? Like if I told somebody that I am ending my relationship with them, and then I constantly get flowers delivered to my work and to my home uh, from this person, that's no longer something that is nice or beautiful or kind. It becomes something that can feel threatening because I've tried to end the relationship, but this person just keeps intruding. And as much as I'm telling them that I'm done, they're kind of not only intruding on my personal space, but maybe they're even doing sort of public displays, like having these flowers delivered to places where other people can witness them in a way that makes other people think that we're still together. It just creates a lot of complications for the victim or for the survivor. Another thing I've heard from survivors is maybe they've received cards, but just like a card every single day from the person. And maybe the only thing on it was like a smiley face, not even any words. So you might say, oh, a smiley face, that's not scary, but it's scary that this person is just repeatedly contacting. Um, So then the next thing is perhaps something that is again more obvious or more people have heard of, which is intimidation, using threats or symbolic violence. So symbolic violence could be everything from a gesture to like sending somebody a picture of like a crushed can or a crushed doll, something that survivor is going to understand as threatening or as intimidating. That is all falls under the umbrella of intimidation. And that includes actual violence, right? Because if I'm violent to somebody once and then I make illusions or I make threats, that person's going to be even more scared of me because they remember what I did to them in the past. The final thing is this concept of interference through sabotage or attack. And this is attempts to disrupt or harm the victim's reputation, career, relationships, or again, their physical safety. So when I mentioned somebody showing up at a person's place of work, or even sending flowers to that person's place of work repeatedly, that goes beyond, oh, I'm just passing through, it's a surprise. And now you are impinging on that person's ability to maintain focus in their workplace. Maybe their boss starts getting upset at all the disruptions, and the boss doesn't necessarily know or understand that this is happening without the survivor's consent. Um, all the way to actual like defamation of character. The stalker may send information or not information, misinformation and lies about the survivor to their coworkers, to their neighbors, to their landlord, etc., in a way that jeopardizes that person's career, jeopardizes their reputation, their social standing, or even jeopardizes their access to shelter. Um, and finally, again, physical violence can be a part of the pattern of stalking. And we'll talk more about the connection between stalking and serious physical harm. Um, but just as with intimate partner violence, being subjected to physical violence is something that can have all kinds of ripple effects, that it's not just about the medical impact or even the psychological impact. It's also about maybe days of work that are lost, maybe having to cancel plans or cancel appearances at important events because you don't want people to see that you've been harmed or you've been injured, or you just don't want them to know more about your personal life. These are all forms of interference. So you can also see from all of these descriptions that there's significant overlap between them, right? Surveillance, physically following the person can go hand in hand with life invasion, showing up in places that the victim has not asked you to be. We're also talking about intimidation. Intimidation and interference can overlap. The surveillance can itself can be a form of intimidation. Showing up in a place that the survivor didn't tell you they were going to be is also a form of intimidation, because you're showing that person, I know where you are. You don't control my access to your information. So all of these are forms of stalking that can really disrupt a person's life. Just a little bit of statistics on stalking, and I'm going to share in a moment one website that has a lot of information on stalking, but there's lots of different places that you can get information about it. But it impacts a lot of people, right? 1 in 3 women and 1 in 3 men will experience a form of stalking in their lifetime. So that's, oh, it's not 1 in 3 men, it's 1 in 6 men. That is a typo. I will correct that in the slide, but it's 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men will experience a form of stalking in their lifetime. So it is, again, more prevalent that women experience this, but both women and men do experience this. And this survey did not include asking people who were perhaps gender nonconforming, but it definitely affects gender nonconforming folks as well. 40% of victims are stalked by a current or former intimate partner. So this is something that in the media is just now sort of catching up to, but for a long time, I think a lot of people thought of stalking as something that happened like to celebrities, and it was like people being stalked by a stranger, somebody who was just kind of like had a crazy obsession with them. That can still happen. I have worked with people who have been stalked by someone who thought they were in a relationship with a victim, even though the victim did not believe themselves to be in a relationship. But the vast majority of people, even when they're not an intimate partner, are being stalked by somebody that they already know. So you see 40% of victims are stalked by a current or former intimate partner, and 42% is by an acquaintance. So that's already 82%. The vast majority of people are stalked by somebody that they know. The next thing that is important to know is that people between the ages of 18 and 24 experience the highest rates of stalking victimization in the United States. So it's a very, very vulnerable time for a lot of young folks. And it's important to keep this in mind, because younger people, I think young adults, really tend to not to be taken seriously a lot of the time, and to be portrayed as being dramatic or exaggerating. But in fact, a lot of people, their stalking experiences happen during this time frame, this period in their life. So it's really important to listen to young people when they're saying that something like this is happening to them. It's very likely that that is what's going on, and that they need help and they need support. So I had to split up this infographic because it doesn't fit all on one page, but stalkingawareness.org, which is the website for the Stalking Prevention Awareness and Resource Center, or SPARC, is a good resource for information. They don't provide direct support, but they do have a lot of information. They have an risk assessment tool. They have a lot of guidance on how to have conversations about stalking, and just how to understand more about what happens and what stalking involves. So there's a big connection between stalking and intimate partner violence. And it's really important to be aware of this, because the stalkers who are also intimate partners or former intimate partners pose the greatest threats to their victims. 85% of intimate partner femicides, so this is a murder that is committed by an intimate partner of a woman, 85% of those attempted were preceded by stalking in the prior year, and 76% of completed femicides were preceded by stalking in the prior year. So It's something to take very, very seriously. It doesn't mean that every single person who is experiencing stalking is going to face an attempt on their life, but there's a pretty high correlation there. And so, one of the things that's really frustrating is that it's actually taken a very long time for our various systems, from criminal justice systems to other first responder systems, to take stalking seriously, and it's still not the easiest of forms of violence to get protection for, but um, it is very, very serious. And so in New York City, there's been a lot of work to get the police up to speed with this. So if you or someone you know is dealing with stalking and is having trouble getting this taken seriously, I would encourage you to reach out to either a family justice center or to an organization like Pillars of Peace, because there are people that you can talk to either within NYPD or intermediaries that should be able to help you get that taken more seriously. Also, here's a big number: 2 years is the average duration of intimate partner stalking. It can definitely go on a lot longer. Um, and in many cases, it does, but the average is 2 years. So that's a pretty significant amount of time for somebody to be um, really scared all the time, not knowing when someone is going to turn up, not knowing when somebody, how much somebody knows about them. There's also some statistics here on when stalking occurs. And the main point is that it can happen before, during, and or after a relationship. You don't see before on this little chart, but you might think a bit about things like romantic comedies and other movies that sort of glamorize um, stalking type behaviors as a precursor to a relationship, right? Like this is where the one partner turns the other one down, but that second person just doesn't take no and keeps coming back. And this is often portrayed as if it's a good thing in film, but it's really not. It's this one person just kind of overriding the other person's consent and not paying attention. Not only not paying attention, but kind of saying, I want to be in a relationship with you, and I will just keep coming back until I get what I want, which is not romantic. It's quite scary. So another, more of these statistics to highlight here is that victims of intimate partner stalking have more separation attempts than victims of intimate partner violence alone. And that makes sense. It's harder for them to get away. It's just harder to get away from the abuser when that person has figured out all these different ways to just keep themselves in your life, and many times even influence or manipulate other people in your life so that you're getting pressure to go back to that person, or you may feel like you cannot find safety away from that person, and maybe it's safest to just sort of wait it out and try again later. Both issues are extremely common. 1 in 3 women, we said, experience stalking, 1 in 6 men, and then 2 in 5 women experience intimate partner violence, and 1 in 4 men experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. So, what are the psychological impacts of stalking? I hope we would have a little more discussion on this, um, but if that's not the case, then maybe we'll have a follow-up discussion sometime, or a live stream on Instagram or another one of our social media pages. But the biggest thing, as you can imagine, that stalking survivors experience is fear. They fear not knowing what will happen next, and they fear that the stalking will never end and that they will never find safety or find peace in their lives. Even though you saw that statistic about 2 years being the average period of stalking, what often happens with stalking survivors is that their stalker may stop for a period of time, and then they may just reach out randomly. Maybe they're not restarting the entire pattern of stalking, but just by making that little contact, they can completely disorient the survivor and make them again fearful and uncertain about what's coming next for that person. Other times, stalking survivors may not know how to respond to things that happen, maybe things that happen to all of us, right? Like we get phishing attempts and we get sort of these random scammer emails of people saying, I have videos of you, and trying to, get a response. For a stalking survivor, they may not know whether this is just a random scammer or whether that's their stalker coming back to them again. So it's important to kind of make a distinction between this and fear that is somehow disproportionate or disordered, because what the fear the stalking survivors are experiencing is directly related to their experience. It's completely rational, and at the same time, it's disruptive to their lives. So the important thing for stalking survivors to experience is to find some safety and know that they're not going to be stalked. But it can be really, really difficult to completely eradicate the stalker from a stalking survivor's life without making huge sacrifices and disruption, right? I think it's something like 1 in 7 stalking survivors will actually move or relocate in order to get away from a stalker. And so people have to make big changes in their own life in order to feel somewhat assured that this person is not going to come back again. And sometimes people are not able to make those changes without severely disrupting their access to income or family support or other things that are really important for them. Oftentimes, survivors of stalking will experience symptoms of PTSD, and I've put a little asterisk on this just because the idea with post-traumatic stress disorder is that the traumatic event has ended, but that the symptoms are not ending in a way that is disordered, is causing disruption in the person's life, and is also disproportionate to the amount of threat that they're actually experiencing. But for stalking survivors, it's very, very difficult sometimes to mark a clear endpoint, which means it's very hard for that person to actually enter a post-traumatic period. They may still be in the traumatic period. New things may happen that could either be coming from that stalker or it could be not coming from that stalker, but it's not irrational for that person to consider that possibility and to feel scared. It can take years, sometimes many years after the last incident before the stalking survivor may feel, okay, it really is over. This person really isn't going to harm me again. And a lot of things in our structure make this difficult and different. So in New York State, orders of protection, or what are in other places referred to as restraining orders, usually have a time limit on them. And it's really hard to usually get those renewed if nothing else has happened. But oftentimes nothing else has happened because there was a restraining order in place. And so someone may feel safe during the period of their restraining order, whether that's 2 years, 5 years, what have you. But then once that restraining order ends, that fear comes back again. Is that person going to make another attempt? Some people do. Some people really are that persistent that they keep coming back. It's important to just note in general, diagnosed and undiagnosed issues that survivors of stalking face. Depression, insomnia, anxiety, all of these seem quite logical, right? Depression, you're feeling like I'm helpless, I'm powerless, somebody else has control of my life. Maybe my job, my family, my reputation has all been impacted, and I maybe lost my job. I'm finding it hard to find a new job. Somebody's sabotaging my reputation. All of these things would make a person feel depressed. You would feel down. You would feel like you didn't have control over your own life. Insomnia. If you're constantly on alert, you're constantly scared, you're constantly looking for the next incident to happen, it's going to be hard for you to relax and your body to be calm enough for you to sleep well. Anxiety, same thing. Of course, if you're worried all the time about somebody stalking you, somebody popping up unexpectedly, somebody having installed um, malware in your devices or having sabotaged you somehow in your career or otherwise, you're going to feel anxious. And this idea of social dysfunction, um, this is just sort of an umbrella term that refers to having trouble in relationships. And this makes sense, right? If you've been a victim of stalking, you're going to find it very hard to trust other people. And this is not just about trusting um, a potential new partner or new friend. It's about trusting all the people in your life because very often stalking survivors, just like survivors of other forms of gender-based violence, will find that their community or other people that they expect to help them will instead let them down, or in some cases may even collude with the stalker, may be charmed or manipulated by the stalker. And so it will be really, really hard for that person to connect with new people, and because they will not have felt safe in any of their relationships or most of their relationships during this period of the stalking. Um, Finally, there's a huge impact on self-esteem and confidence. Victims of stalking are simultaneously made to feel powerless, and they frequently have their fears minimized and dismissed by providers, first responders, police officers, and I also mentioned family and friends who do not understand the context of stalking incidents or their gravity. So that leads to simultaneously a diminished sense of competence because I am trying to make my point, make myself heard. I'm trying to get help. I'm trying to, get out of a dangerous situation. And yet other people are just constantly questioning me and making me think that it's all in my head, or maybe it's not that bad, or um, I need to give this person a chance or give them the benefit of the doubt. And that is going to make it hard for them to trust their own judgment. And it's also going to make it hard for them to trust others because all these times that they reached out for help, all these times that they said that they were scared, other people um, didn't believe them. This is something we see with victims of intimate partner violence as well. Um, but it's the experience of being stalked, I think, has a particular psychological impact because it's this very claustrophobic feeling that you can never escape, that this person is just kind of out there watching you or out there pulling strings in your life, and at any point he could come back again. So what might make it harder for a stalking survivor to heal? Um, One of the big things, obviously, is if you're not able to get actual protection and support, and so the stalking behaviors are continuing. Um, Now with social media, with the internet, there's so many ways that a stalker can disguise their phone, their identity. And so it can be really, really hard for a survivor to even prove that the things that are happening to them are happening because they're being stalked by a particular person. It can also mean that it's hard for them to actually stop the harassment and stalking that's going on because every time they're getting these contacts, it's coming from a different number, it's coming from a different place. And they're very tricky. Some people think, oh, just change your phone number because then this person can't reach you. But if there's any other element to the stalking, oftentimes people will not change their number because they want to keep tabs on, is this person still trying to contact me? Are they going to make any threats? It's a way of also looking out for their safety sometimes to maintain the same phone number so that they know and maybe can see a little bit more what's coming. That if they had blocked that person, but that person perhaps still might have access to other locations that they frequent, or be able to access their time or their life or their family in some other way, right? Even if you yourself go into a shelter, an emergency shelter, every person that you know and every person in your family is not going to also enter an emergency shelter in a confidential location. So even when you take that big step to remove yourself and to try to find safety, um, it's still possible for this person to have access to a lot of people who are close to you. And that means that you have to make decisions based on your experience with them to kind of figure out your own safety. That's one example. There's a lot of other things I'm sure that you could come up with, and I hope that we'll be able to have a follow-up discussion about these. So what can we do? And this is about both addressing the problem of stalking and addressing the psychological impact. But the big thing that we can do to reduce this serious, lingering psychological impact of stalking is to improve our responses to stalking itself. PTSD and other disorders form most often when there is an invalidating and inadequate response to the traumatic event. If I get support right away after my traumatic event, I'm much less likely to experience PTSD. And that's why PTSD rates for things like um, sexual violence, intimate partner violence, and things where there's an element of shame or stigma. PTSD is much higher for those types of events than it is for something like a car accident or a natural disaster. Because after a car accident or a natural disaster, most people don't go around blaming the victims, saying it was probably their fault, asking them what they could have done differently. They just validate that that was a horrible experience and try to help that person recover from it. So if we can give people a better response, we can reduce the amount of PTSD and other disorders that come out of these events. The second and most obvious thing is to secure safety. You cannot work on healing from trauma if you have not, if the trauma hasn't ended and you're still unsafe, you're still experiencing a loss of safety. So we need to make sure that, as much as we're trying to do better with this, it's not across the board. Even in New York City, it's not always easy, and definitely nationally, it's not always easy for stalking survivors to access protection orders and other supports until the behaviors have escalated. Something that you hear from a lot of survivors is frustration that within our criminal justice system and other systems, it feels like things need to get worse before I can get help. Like even when things have just started and I can see that it's going down a wrong path and I need protection, I can't get it. I have to wait for it to get worse, which is a really horrible position to put survivors in. So when the more we do to continue to advocate and make these systems work better for protecting survivors, and the more we as community members also stand up for survivors so that they maybe don't have to directly, they don't have to go to the criminal justice system, which has these kind of high bars that you have to meet in order to get assistance. But we as a community stand up and protect survivors, then they will have less time being spent in fear. A lot of times people need that extra protection because their community members are not standing up for them. Their community members are maybe even telling right along with the stalker saying, it's not that bad, maybe it's in your head, you need to give this person a chance. And so if we can change that as a society, we will start to see improvement in outcomes for survivors as well. And education. So many people do not know that they are experiencing stalking or know how serious it is. They are not aware of this correlation between homicide and stalking, or femicide, as many of the victims of these type of murders are women. Most people are not aware of this. And so the more people who understand how serious it is, the more of us become familiar with the facts on stalking, the more survivors will be able to access the support and the information that they need. So thank you again for joining us. Whether you joining us live or you're watching this recording later on our YouTube channel, please reach out to us with any follow-up questions. If you need help, you can always reach out to our help email address, help@pillarsofpeace.org, or you can call our helpline, which is active, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 at 347-242-3573. You can also take a screenshot of this screen, or you can visit our website, which is pillarsofpeace.org. So I should have included that as well on here, but it's just the same as the ending of this help email address, pillarsofpeace.org. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good night. And I hope you'll join us for our next webinar next month.